Please welcome Jay Richards, Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation.
Well, it's great to see all of you here this morning, and welcome to those many who are watching this event live online. I've been really excited about this event. So some of you that are familiar with Heritage may know we started almost a year and a half ago a new initiative called Restoring American Wellness, which is essentially kind of the Heritage MAHA portfolio. And so some of us started studying the variety of MAHA-related issues, whether it be vaccines or pesticides or the USDA food guidelines. And I quickly realized that pesticides in farming was the most complicated issue, both scientifically and politically. And so we have looked forward to something like this for a long time. So we'll start actually with what we call a fireside chat with a leading figure and public health official in this fight. So that will then be followed by a discussion with my colleague Jennifer Galardi. So let me first introduce our first guest and then we'll get started. Dr. Joseph Ladapo, MD and Ph.D., serves as the Surgeon General of Florida and Secretary of the Florida Department of Health, a role to which Governor Ron DeSantis appointed him in September 2021. He simultaneously holds the position of Professor of Medicine at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Dr. Ladapo earned a Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude, from Wake Forest University in North Carolina in 2000, where he competed as a varsity track and field athlete and served as team captain in the decathlon. And side note, I was with him about a year and a half ago at a conference, went to the hotel gym at 6 a.m., only because I had awoken, not because I normally do that. And guess who was in there doing handstands? And I said, I think I know who he is. So he's still at it. He then, after finishing in Wake Forest, received both his Doctor of Medicine from Harvard Medical School and his Ph.D. in Health Policy from Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in 2008. He's a dedicated physician, researcher, and public health leader. Dr. Ladapo brings a rigorous, evidence-based perspective to one of the nation's most influential state health offices. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Ladapo. In Washington and here at Heritage, because you've been a real leader on these issues, including a lot of very complex issues that, you know, it's not exactly clear how they land along the left-right spectrum. In fact, really, honestly, a lot of the MAHA issues, they shouldn't be partisan issues. Questions about, you know, increase in chronic disease among kids, that's not obviously a Democratic Party or Republican Party issue, but for whatever reason, they sort of have landed that way. And so you've been quite outspoken, especially in your sort of your position at Florida. So I do want us to talk a bit about glyphosate and pesticides. I really kind of initially, I want to ask you sort of more generally your work. I would say, I would frame it as an attempt to increase openness and transparency in health and in public health for the citizens of Florida. Just talk a bit about your work with transparency and its importance.
Yeah, I think, you know, every now and then, I've been in this position as Surgeon General now of Florida for almost 5.5 years, which blows my mind because I never even imagined I'd be working in government. Like, government just wasn't something that I aspired to or had really any interest in working in at all. And, you know, I was really happy in academia. But when the COVID-19 pandemic started, you know, you mentioned transparency, and I was actually at UCLA, I was a professor there, and I was working in the hospital. I was actually taking care of patients the week that Governor Newsom shut down the state. And you know, I'm a dad of 3 kids, and my wife and I are like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with the kids? And you know, that was like primary concern number one when the shutdown started.
Leave California? Was that your first thought?
Like, oh, who's going to take care of the kids? And but as I was working in the hospital that week, I got to see the pandemonium, and I got to see just clearly frantic decision making. And you know, and these shutdowns were coming through, and it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense because at that point we had data from Wuhan already that clearly showed that the risk was concentrated in older people. There was no question. That was known already in March of 2020, absolutely known. And these policies didn't make sense because you shut down. What are you going to do when you reopen? You know, you're going to be right back to where you started. And so I started writing in the name of transparency, in the name of like, here are facts, here's information. Yes, people are saying all this other stuff, but if you think about what we know and what makes sense, I don't think this other stuff is the way to go. And really, I've just continued doing that. The hallucinations about the impact of the COVID-19 vaccines, it was very predictable early on, and I wrote as much and published in the Wall Street Journal that if you try and force these things, you're going to create a lot of problems. And we've just continued doing that. Fortunately, Governor DeSantis has allowed me to do that. I mean, I can't think of any other governor who would have allowed me to actually just say what I think and say what I believe is true. And it's, you know, thanks to Secretary RFK Jr., who's a good friend of mine, and his focus on MAHA, it's opened doors for other areas that would clearly benefit from transparency.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a sort of perfect segue because I can remember, I think that's when I first became aware of you was during the COVID madness. And so obviously in that case, you're focusing on, of course, first the lockdowns and the virus itself, and then the vaccines and the vaccine mandates. But you have started in Florida an initiative called Exposing Food Toxins, which focuses obviously on a different issue. Talk a bit about that campaign.
Yeah, so this is really the child, if you will, of First Lady Casey DeSantis, Governor DeSantis' wife. She's a young woman, and the poor woman was diagnosed with breast cancer a few years ago. And you know, that's no one wants. I mean, that's just a devastating diagnosis, no matter what, but especially if you're a young person. And you know, and her experience led her to ask the questions that I gotta imagine every young person asks who's diagnosed with cancer is, why did this happen? Why me? How could this happen? And those questions led her into this heightened interest in environmental exposures. And obviously one of the major ones is food, you know, I mean, and that's not the only one, guys. You know, it's the stuff we drink, what's in the water, what's in the air that we breathe. But the food is a major issue. And we've really teamed up, Casey DeSantis, Miss Casey DeSantis, and me at the Department of Health with my team to start probing some commonly consumed foods. And so that's what sprouted the initiative.
So I suppose there's at least two kind of classes of issues. There's the so-called GRAS standards that generally recognize as safe standards, in which initially the intention was that you shouldn't have to do a randomized controlled trial of salt and baking soda and stuff like that, so that seems fine. But as a result of this weird kind of regulatory loophole, you end up with lots and lots of actual ingredients in the food that we consume that we're not aware of. And then there's also the various pesticides, and in particular the herbicide glyphosate, which I don't think until a couple of years ago was a household term. I mean, I don't think most people had any idea what to do with that. But how do we think about those two separate issues? Because one is it's sort of the literal ingredients that are in the food, and the other is things that we use for various reasons for farming.
Yeah, there's so much fruit on the tree to pick from, and you know, I think, I mean, you're right. There are kind of multiple issues at play, right? There's sort of the regulatory framework of this generally accepted as or generally recognized as safe, and that's a whole box of just surprises and some of those things definitely are, and then there are very good reasons to wonder why other chemicals would be in that list. I think one of the benefits of the COVID pandemic, despite all the tremendous suffering that it wrought and it continues to wreak, is that I think more people became aware of the fact that things that we assumed were okay and or assumed were free of corruption and were assumed were well-intended are completely not. And so at least for some of the generally recognized as safe items, how did those things come to be on the list? Well, they came to be on the list, undoubtedly because, Mr. Bob made a deal with Mr. with Mr. Bruce to make sure that this got accepted on the list because it made Mr. Bob's life easier and his profits better. The lane that we've really been leaning into has been more in the, well, what are the other things that aren't on the label that are in the food and have an impact on health? So we've been testing for heavy metals, which we know have an impact on health, and we've been testing for pesticides, which we can be confident have an impact on health, despite whatever controversy or doubts that may be introduced. And scientifically, it's fine to have doubts, but at some point you have to make a decision. And these items that we've been testing for fall into the category of prudence dictates that we should minimize exposure.
Well, and very often when you're talking about these things, you invoke this idea of informed consent, which in some ways is the kind of moral or philosophical thread that connects almost all these issues together, whether it's vaccines or pesticides or ingredients that are in your food that you don't know about. But talk a little bit about why is that so important? I mean, you're a medical doctor and a public health official, but why is that so important? Why is that your lodestar?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. It's for me, actually, it really has to do completely with, why I think we're on this earth. Obviously everyone is welcome to believe whatever they want, but I absolutely believe, and I will say I know, that each one of us is a reflection of God's light and God's being, and as reflections of God, we deserve the dignity and the respect that comes with that. And I can't respect you if I am giving you something and lying to you about it. Like, I clearly don't respect you. If I'm telling you one thing and I know the truth is something else, I clearly don't respect you. How can you have any dignity? How can I have any recognition of the fact that that we live in a universe and that there's more to this life than just what we can touch, and if I do that, and the fact is you can't do that. So that's why it's important to me, because I believe that absolutely, and we therefore deserve to be treated in a way that is consistent with our origin.
Well, and so I think Florida may be at least the most visible state that has, certainly its Surgeon General has come out against all manner of medical mandates, including vaccine mandates, which from my perspective is a wonderful thing. I mean, how much pushback have you gotten from that so far? I don't think it's happened statutorily, but I know that at least the governor and the Surgeon General are on board. So.
Yeah, we have received a lot of pushback, and push as they might, the positions that we've taken here is absolutely the correct moral position. I mean, it is the position that that is consistent with the belief, if you believe it, that we are in fact representations of God's being, that we are representations of God's creation. You cannot force someone. I mean, literally, we come to this, we come to Earth with our souls and our bodies, and that's what we come to Earth with. And so if we cannot control those two things in terms of what we put in, right, whether it's what we put into our minds, right, or what we put into our bodies, like what are you? You know, are you actually a free being? And if you can't control those two things, guess what? You're not a free being, and you deserve to be free. So I think, you know, I think it is, you know, informed consent is it's important, it's all consistent, it's correct. We're getting the pushback, but I'm also seeing a lot of states. I actually was in Idaho a few weeks ago, and Leslie Manukian is making great strides there. There are other states where people are pushing back against this like normalization of me telling you what you have to put in your body. So I think that it's going to work out in the way that it should.
Well, and I just want to underscore what you're talking about, because I know that sometimes some in the media can sometimes misrepresent certain things that we say on the subject. I didn't hear you say anything about banning vaccines and pesticides in foods. You talked a lot about the importance of free agency and choice because we're creatures made in the image of God. But say a little bit about that, because, I mean, informed consent doesn't require draconian bans. Giving people freedom and telling them what the costs and benefits are doesn't require bans, and yet any discussion of this seems to be presented that way.
I agree. And there are sometimes some things that you should ban. Yeah. I think you probably should ban glyphosate, actually. But it doesn't start, it doesn't start there, right? Because like a lot of times, you know, I love markets. I mean, a lot of times markets work things out, right? You know, so the currency is information, and that helps sort out prices, and it helps sort out demand and supply. So you don't need to start with bans. There's some things that should be banned, I actually think. But oftentimes when you're in that category, you're there because there's such a distortion of information that is so distorted that the decisions that it's leading to can't, you know, there just can't be anything good there. And therefore a ban is appropriate because the market, the landscape is so distorted. But in general, no, it's not. You don't need to worry necessarily. I mean, it's not, you know, bans are sort of a secondary issue.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you mentioned markets, because what you want, a market works well when the incentives are aligned properly. But isn't this sort of the point with informed consent, is that if there's a radical information asymmetry between the supplier and the seller and the customer, so that you're not actually making you're not making a decision that's exercising your free will. So it's not a free exchange. It's in a sense either secret, or it's a kind of form of coercion in which somebody's telling you, I'm going to sell you this. By the way, there's like 75 other things I'm selling you that might not be good for you, and I'm not going to tell you anything about it. And so it seems to me that radical transparency by itself could help realign market incentives, because people, you know, look, we buy different things if we have reason to think, okay, maybe this is going to mess up my gut microbiome or something like that. And so in some ways, I mean, do you think it's like the market's not even being allowed to work properly on some of these things because there's so much lack of information among the consumer?
Oh, that's absolutely. I mean, oh my gosh, the true words have never been spoken. That's so true. And, you know, I think, you know, just speaking of glyphosate, one of the challenges with it, and I have major concerns about its use. And, you know, I think obviously as an economist, you know, one of the things, you know, you take microeconomics. I took some microeconomics at the Harvard Kennedy School during my graduate school years. One of the things I love microeconomics, and one of the reasons I love about it is because it's actually fundamentally about decision making, right? How do you use limited resources to maximize some outcome? But the other thing that's nice about economics is that it helps people think about things about trade-offs, right? So, if you don't use this, what are you going to use, and what does it mean to not use this? What are other things that are going to happen because of that? And those are absolute considerations that that need to be included as we hopefully transition permanently away from glyphosate. One of the things that really troubles me about it, and why I think when it's eventually banned and no one uses it at all, it will be a good thing, is because the evidence is strong that it has very detrimental effects on our gut microbiome. And we should be very suspicious and wary of anything that affects the gut microbiome, because it's literally, in some ways, it's like our second brain. It's got its fingers in so many parts of how we function as human beings: our energy, our mood, our immune system, our physical vitality. It's, and again, particularly our immune system, which is so important. So there, some risks are very large and need to be considered very carefully, and that's one of the challenges with glyphosate.
Well, and I'm wondering if the renewed focus under Secretary Kennedy on this massive increase, especially in childhood chronic diseases, it helps us to sort of focus on this, because I know my sense is that a lot of the discussion on glyphosate until a few years ago focused on, for instance, increases in certain kinds of cancer among people that work on farms and farmers. But of course, the chronic disease crisis is almost certainly largely the result of things we've done to our environment that over time we see the signal 10 or 20 years out. It's not going to kill you today, but 20 years from now, your immune response is going to be completely scrambled. And so is that your sense that, you want to sort of focus on those kind of long-term effects, which we're at a position now where we're actually seeing the effects that maybe we wouldn't have noticed. The signal wouldn't have been visible 30 years ago.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That is, I think that's correct. And there's so many. I mean, the list of candidates for these exposures is very long, and sort of these new exposures, right, that are products of modern society. I mean, we're actually in the Department of Health, we're also doing some work on radio frequency radiation. I mean, there's just, as you look more closely at many of these exposures, it's impossible to have any degree of scientific training and read more about physiologic impacts at the cellular level and not believe that there's a human impact. It's impossible. I mean, it's impossible. With radio frequency radiation at the frequency that our cell phones work at, or the Wi-Fi work at, for example, it affects calcium channels and the function of calcium channels in human cells, including neurons. Like, it's impossible. You cannot do that and not have some effect. It may not be, it may not be a big effect. It may be a big effect. It may be some people are more susceptible to having a big effect and be sensitive, but you just can't do all these things. You can't load bodies up with arsenic. You can't load bodies up with glyphosate. You can't load bodies up with lead or mercury, even at small amounts for a long period of time, and think that it has no effect. It's just you just can't. I mean, it's just not a reasonable conclusion.
Well, and we are seeing the effects. So we're not at the position where we're saying, well, let's try this. Everything seems to be fine. We're in a position where we're seeing the effects of, it has to be something that we're doing to our environment, either our food or our technology or our social interactions. The gene pool hasn't changed radically in the last 30 years. So we sort of know that. So let's pivot very briefly to the sort of policy scene, because I know you've got training in that and you're right in a policy position. So I'll say for my colleagues in Heritage Action, and I think some of the people in the room have spent more or less the last year playing whack-a-mole with various attempts to create a liability shield for glyphosate. Of course, the famous liability shield was a 1986 law on childhood vaccines. And the same move has been afoot both in the federal and the state level. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? And do you think that's the sort of thing that can be stopped? Or, I mean, what do we do? Because, people are very interested in sort of having something like that in place for obvious industry reasons. That's bad for lots of people, but I don't know that the political will on our side to stop it is quite as intense, and so it requires activists to read these bills and these rules every day to make sure something doesn't sneak in.
It's crazy. It is like whack-a-mole, right? You know, someone's slipping something into one bill, and you know, it's a bill about, I don't know. I don't know. You know, I don't know how tall buildings can be. And then there's some, you know, paragraph about like some like glyphosate or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. You know, I'll tell you that I'm so grateful for the people who actually look at all the bills and like then notify other people that, hey, this is in the bill.
Room right here. Yeah.
I'm so grateful. And we had issues like this actually with a bill in Florida, this farm bill, this agriculture bill that somehow had included this language that would have made it criminal to, you know, all of our favorites, right, to provide like false information about, I think like food ingredients or something. And it's completely insane, like, you know, for this to be in the law. And fortunately, it was flagged by people who read bills, and you know, and there was really a groundswell of opposition because it's an insane piece of language to, like, especially this day and age where, you know, well, there's so much that is unknown, and finally, you know, with Secretary Kennedy and others, their efforts to make the unknown known. It's insane. Honestly, I don't even know where to start with folks, but I think you know, we keep playing whack-a-mole, and hopefully, it's sad to me that, frankly, that some elected leaders just, you know, I mean, it's really a betrayal. If you are conscious, it's one thing if you don't know that, I mean, which presumably you have a team that helps you.
That does happen sometimes,
Yeah,
so that
right.
legislators vote on bills that they don't know what
I've
they contain.
heard that happens sometimes in this city, I think. But if you do know, that's one of those, I mean, that's just a profound betrayal to me. How can you like literally sell out humankind by, you know, by agreeing to something like that? You know, it's you have children too. I mean, they're going to be harmed too. You know, so
I mean, again, this is a case where presumably the market incentives are aligned, and a liability shield manages to misalign them. I mean, all I know is if I found out a product has some kind of government-issued liability shield, that doesn't make me trust the product more. You know, I don't feel sort of more comforted by this. Well, so I mean, you're also a father and a husband and a physician. I mean, what are some practical steps you suggest for people in those positions just to make their lives better and cleaner and healthier? What are some of the things that you and your wife do, for instance?
Oh yeah, no, I love that question. So you know, my wife Brianna is actually, so I'm the doctor, but Brianna is the healer. So, you know, not every doctor, most doctors are not healers, but some people, they come to this earth and they just have, you know, they just are naturally tapped into healing, which is a beautiful thing. And so my wife actually has, in terms of the health of our family, she's led us with her intuition in terms of how to really pursue that. And so that's made that's made all the difference for us and for me and for our children. I think that what I have gathered is that I think that it's important to find resources that, and you know, maybe we might even put some more on our website, but it's important to find resources that really seem to be in tune with truth and I wouldn't even say truth. I wouldn't even say reality or something like that. I mean, they're in touch with reality, but with truth. So, for example, there's a woman, Dr. Pero, and I think Dr. Pero's first name is Michelle, but she's coming out with a new book, and I read a lot of it, and the book is just amazing. I mean, it's a guide to how you can help your kids in all sorts of different ways to be as healthy as possible in this day and age. And And, you know, and I think there are resources like that. There are a lot of terrible resources out there. So it's, you know, and I would say that if you have a friend that's intuitive, like latch onto that friend, work with that friend. If your partner's intuitive, work with that individual to try and identify these resources that can give you some guidance. You know, what can we do to make the water better, to make that better for our family? What can we do about food selection to make that better for our family? What can we do about, you know, about like the screens to make that better for our family? And, you know, it's not that it matters for every single type of person, but for us, we have 3 boys. And one of our boys, you know, 2 of the boys, you know, they're just like, they pretty much can eat, drink, whatever they want. Doesn't affect their behavior, doesn't affect anything about them. But our 3rd boy, if he eats certain things, I mean, it changes. It clearly changes how he behaves. He's clearly more sensitive to some of the junk and the crap that is in food. And we mostly eat organic, but you know, kids are kids, so he'll sneak stuff here and there, and we can tell, but changes in his behavior. And so, you know, I think that there's knowledge out there. There's good knowledge, and it's important to find those very good resources because they're not, by any measure, all created equally, and that matters.
Well, I feel like we just got started, but we're at an end. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Dr. Joseph Ladapo on stage. Well, with that, we'll now introduce our panel, and I will introduce my colleague Jennifer Galardi, who is a senior policy analyst with our Restoring American Wellness Initiative. So please welcome Jennifer, who will introduce our panel.
Good morning, and thank you for coming in person, and to those online, thank you for joining us. In almost my year of working at Heritage, I've come up to this podium a handful of times to introduce an issue or make some opening remarks. Usually, I'm pretty well read on the topic, and I'd like to think I have some pretty enlightening things to say, or at least, you know, things that will make people a little more curious. I'm sure you'll find people that will disagree with that, but for the most part, I feel well read on most of the topics that I introduce. That's not the case today. Not that I'm not well read on it, but it doesn't sometimes make my decisions where I stand on glyphosate any easier. And I'd like to tell you I have a definitive stance, but with pesticides, and more specifically glyphosate, I really don't. It's a difficult and messy conversation, and it's one that requires nuance and various voices and interest to come to the table. So I'm here, probably like many of you today in this room and online, just trying to listen and understand to the best of my ability the best path forward for all Americans. And I think we've got an excellent panel lined up to bring some expertise and perspective to do just that. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panel. Dr. Meryl Nass is a board-certified internal medicine physician who is also trained in functional medicine. She earned recognition early in her career for groundbreaking work in biological warfare epidemiology. Dr. Nass has been a prominent expert on anthrax, vaccines, and biowarfare issues. She has consulted for organizations including the Cuban Ministry of Health, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the World Bank, and the Director of National Intelligence. Since 2007, Dr. Nass has been an active blogger and journalist writing on anthrax, medicine, pandemics, the COVID-19 response, and global affairs. Sadly, her medical license was suspended by the Maine Board of Licensure. You're very welcome here. We all get canceled around here. In medicine over allegations of spreading misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines. In 2023, she founded doortofreedom.org, a nonprofit dedicated to opposing the WHO's proposed expansions of authority over global public health and pandemics. It is now focused on addressing the U.S. agriculture supply chain crisis. Pedram Esfandiary, Yes, he said close enough, is a partner and trial attorney based in the Los Angeles office of Wisner Baum, where he concentrates his practice on toxic tort injuries, pharmaceutical drug liability, class actions, and consumer fraud litigation. Rick Clark is a fifth-generation farmer from Williamsport, Indiana, who we're happy to welcome back here. He was here in August for a regenerative agriculture panel. Soil health and human health are the main drivers of the farm. Creating a balance with Mother Nature, he says, is critical for success. He is most proud of incorporating regenerative agriculture farming practices with all acres being certified organic. He calls it regenerative organic stewardship. Rick is building a system that will be viable and profitable for generations to come. Miles Pollard is the economic policy analyst in the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. He previously worked in Heritage's Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment, where he conducted technical, economic, and national security cost-benefit analysis on emerging policy issues. Miles now supports the Heritage's Restoring American Wellness initiative, bringing the same data-driven approach to questions over public health, regulation, and risk. More recently, he wrote The Truth About Glyphosate, Genuine Concerns and Sobering Realities for the Daily Signal. So I'd like to welcome them all to the stage.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Thank you all for being here. For many of you traveling in to Washington, D.C., welcome to spring. It's very nice. Thank you. Meryl, I'll start with you since you're closest. You've studied glyphosate rather intensely. Why are MAHA advocates so vociferous in their contests against glyphosate? What are the main health implications according to your research?
Well, let me first start off in that glyphosate is actually a herbicide. Sorry, it's not on. Hello, hello, no.
I can handle mine.
Yeah,
Let's see. Try.
hello? I don't think so. No, not working.
Hold on. Should I give her mine? Technical difficulties.
Oh,
Yep.
now it's working. Hello? Is that good? Okay. All right. So anyway, glyphosate is a herbicide. It kills plants. It kills bacteria, most plants, and many fungi and other microorganisms. And it does this by suppressing a particular pathway that leads to the production of amino acids, which are necessary for the life of those substances. So that means it also kills the microorganisms in the soil, many of them, and in our guts. And that's a problem because the microorganisms in our guts help us to process food and eat, get nutrition. Now, because this pathway is not in humans, it was initially claimed that glyphosate was going to be perfectly safe. Now, we're calling it a pesticide because legally it is in a class of substances that are, by law, called pesticides. But just remember, it's a herbicide. So this shikimate pathway is not in humans, but still the microorganisms are in humans, the microorganisms are in soil. It affects the quality of the food we eat and how we process food. And there may be other things that glyphosate does. So it has been shown, for example, that it is genotoxic. It can actually cause damage to DNA, and it also increases oxidative stress. And either of those mechanisms potentially can lead to cancers and other illnesses in humans. Now, the problem is that in the United States, the way substances are regulated by FDA and EPA, toxic substances or drugs and vaccines, is that most of the data is generated by the actual manufacturer. And so there is a great opportunity for fudging the data or for creating fraud in many different ways. And it has been shown that, in fact, for glyphosate, Monsanto ghost wrote basically the most important review article claiming the safety of glyphosate, which was published in 2000. In 2017, when there was a lawsuit that was brought, it turned out Monsanto, which had not yet been bought by Bayer, had to produce over 1 million documents. And in those documents, it was learned that Monsanto congratulated itself for ghostwriting that review article in 2017. Now, the 3 authors, 2 of them have died, and the third has not responded to what actually went on with that article, which claimed glyphosate was safe, and is still being referred to in the literature as being an important article. So finally, not in 2017, but only in December of last year, was that article retracted from the literature. When you pick through all the many studies, and there's over 1,000 studies on glyphosate, you can see that some studies say it's safe, but some studies say it's very dangerous. If you look at the animal studies, you can show in various species of animal that if you give them glyphosate at levels that are roughly equivalent to what humans are consuming, they do develop cancers and have other medical conditions at much higher rates, or in some cases at slightly higher rates, and in some other cases for other conditions, no increased rates. So you have mechanism, you have animal studies, and you have some, but not all, epidemiologic studies that all show glyphosate causes a problem. But on the other hand, you have regulatory capture. So you have people from the industry who are running many of the sub-agencies at EPA. You have falsified medical scientific literature. You have a revolving door. You have evidence that the scientists at the EPA, which regulates pesticides, have been overruled by their political appointees. And basically you have a mess. And our society has never come to grips with how to deal with this mess, which applies to all pesticides, all drugs, all vaccines. And glyphosate, the profit on glyphosate is said to be $2 billion a year. So there's a lot of money to support corrupt behaviors.
Okay, well, you kind of laid out the entire case there for it. And I hope you didn't steal all of Pedram's thunder from talking about the lawsuit a little bit, but you did litigate probably the biggest case against Monsanto successfully. You won that case. What did you uncover in the discovery for your case? Did you find what Meryl was saying, that these were ghostwritten, and why was it so damning for Monsanto?
I think, Doctor, you should have tried the case on our behalf. We're going to earn a bigger verdict. All of that is true. So we tried 2 cases. Am I good? Yeah. We tried 2 cases against Monsanto back in 2018 and 2019 on behalf of individuals diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's a really severe form of blood cancer, alleging that the exposure to Roundup glyphosate caused their cancer. And in the lead up to the trials, we obtained troves of documents. We got to speak to some of the CEOs and executives at Monsanto about the science, about what the company had and had not done throughout the years. And all of what the good doctor just told us is absolutely true. There was huge evidence of manipulating data, ghostwriting, paying scientists, independent scientists, to put their names on studies that were actually written by Monsanto, and then not disclosing that in the conflict of interest statement in the paper. The EPA relies on those studies in renewing the registration of glyphosate in the US and throughout the world. We have evidence of a really cozy relationship between Monsanto and EPA officials, this revolving door that we just heard about that led to glyphosate being renewed time after time without much scrutiny being paid to the actual science behind it. There was also a third kind of tactic, the unholy trinity that Monsanto employed, was to attack real science. So whenever we had a study come out, a large human study of agricultural workers in the Midwest, or an animal study that showed an association between glyphosate and cancer, Monsanto's natural instinct wasn't to look critically at that data, implement measures, study the formula. It was to just attack the scientists who were putting out this data in order to maintain the registration of glyphosate. And this had huge consequences over the decades for glyphosate being re-registered in the US, its increased use throughout the world. And unfortunately for our clients, their exposure to it, that led them to develop these horrendous conditions, cancers. And we also see glyphosate being associated with other conditions like metabolic disorders, disruption of the endocrine system. So it's a big deal, it's a big issue.
I'm kind of feeling a little Groundhoggy Day with COVID, you know, the not allowing opposition research to come forward. Right. So it seems to be a playbook here. Right. What was their position? What was their defense?
Sure.
Apparently they didn't have it. You won, but what was it?
Well, their defense was the best one the money can buy, right? The EPA says it's safe. The EPA, who we have had a cozy relationship with, you know, ever since we put out this product, says it's safe. Health Canada says it's safe. Health Australia says it's safe. But they employed the same playbook in all the jurisdictions around the world that they did in the US to the same results. So it was the best defense money could buy, which is point the finger at the regulator and say, look, they agree with us on the science. This stuff doesn't cause an issue. And it took until 2015 when the International Agency for Research on Cancer, part of the WHO, finally classified glyphosate as a 2A probable human carcinogen when people started to wake up to the issue. And we had the lawsuits filed, and we were able to obtain more evidence, never before seen documents and communications from within Monsanto that showed that there was corporate malfeasance going on, that showed that there was a cover-up of all the things they've done throughout the years. So we were able to expose the truth that way. And unfortunately, I'm sitting here today after all those verdicts and all that science and information coming out, and the president wants to issue an executive order saying glyphosate is essential for our economy and nothing should be done about it. And the Supreme Court down the road is getting ready to review a case where they could potentially bar all failure to warn claims, lawsuits against pesticide manufacturers related to the labeling, the warning labels on pesticides in the U.S.
Essentially creating the liability shield that so many in the MAHA movement are against, and the liability, like for vaccines.
That's right.
Yeah, and then I'll ask one more follow-up question, and I think it'll meld nicely into Rick. Now, your case was with a farmer, right, who had lots of exposure. What do the studies show, and what did you find? I mean, is there differences between, say, somebody like me or in the audience that's just, it's in our food, it's in the agricultural byproducts of our food that go into what we consume, and the people that are in contact with it on a day-to-day, and their hands, their skin.
For sure. There are studies that show there is an impact when you have glyphosate exposure or any pesticide exposure through the food, but the risk is overwhelmingly stronger when you have someone who's exposed through spraying day in, day out, a farmer or a domestic applicator. Our clients in those trials, they actually the first one, he was a groundskeeper in Benicia, California, where he sprayed it for a couple of years, working around the yards of the school. And just think about it, this is around school children, where these pesticides hover in the air, they're on the grass where kids play. That's for context. And the second case, I was on behalf of a couple in Alameda County, California, who sprayed it at their residence for 30 years. And they developed cancer, and they were not agricultural workers, they were people who sprayed it, you know, on and off during the seasons over the course of many years. And that chronic exposure, and the data, we see the same with heavy metals, it's the chronic exposure day in, day out over years that leads to these risks manifesting.
And just, is it still available for household use?
I think glyphosate is in the U.S.
No, not since 2023. So Monsanto, which is now Bayer, voluntarily took it out of household products. It still can be used by landscapers and farmers because most of the plaintiffs, there are 200,000 plaintiffs alleging mostly that they've gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from their use of glyphosate. So they figured that most of the plaintiffs are householders. Let's take it away from them, and but let the farmers who have the GMO seeds continue to use it. So Rick, let's just leave you with the glyphosate issue. How
tell us a bit about your farm and transforming it from conventional to regenerative. What inspired you to make the change? How difficult was it? And what the rewards have been? And feel free to kind of add in on anything they've already talked about.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to be here today. Thank you for letting me speak today. I greatly appreciate that. We have been on a regenerative journey for about 17 or 18 years. So when I was woken up to become more aware of being a good steward of the land and being conservation minded, it was an erosion event, okay? So we did a tillage event. Mother Nature created a storm overnight. The soil moved from the field onto the road. That's when I decided it was time to make change. So that change then developed or pushed me into research. And anyone in the room that's as old as me or older, and you remember the days when they had that squawk for the internet, wow, 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 you know, we're going to come on. That's where I started. So it was very slow, but I quickly realized that we need to incorporate no-till practices in our farming operation, and we need to incorporate cover crops. And by doing this, I then realized that we can start to eliminate inputs and still maintain profitability. Now, I didn't say increase yield. I said maintain or increase profitability. That's a big difference. One of the major hangups that we have in the farming community is success for a farmer is based on yield, and that is so incorrect. There are many other things we can base success on, so we need to start looking at the farm as a business like you would any other business. Car manufacturers don't make cars just to make cars, so farmers shouldn't be producing crops just to produce crops. And the number one thing that we have to understand, in my opinion, today, is you cannot have human health until you first have soil health. It all starts there. Yeah. I appreciate the gentleman that spoke from Florida. Thank you so much for your insights. That was awesome. We have to also understand that a farmer is sitting in a position of heritage, okay? They are farming and doing things the way they've been taught, the tools that have been given to them. So if we are going to make drastic decisions, we have to have drastic answers for the farmer. And education is now at the top of the list. And do you want me to go where I'm going now, or you want to do this later?
Go for it. At a time like the present.
Yeah, that's good, because it may be gone in a couple of minutes. The things that we have to understand, again, it all starts in the soil. And I think one of the major inputs that is overlooked is water. Water has to be right. And this is what I mean by this. The water that is being used, and I don't care if you're spraying biology, I don't care if you're spraying chemistry, I don't care what you're doing with the water. If you're drinking water, the water has to be right. We have been using water, a water system from a company by the name of Personova, and we've been using this product for 3 years, and I'm telling you right now that we could go to every farm in the United States and we could reduce glyphosate consumption by half by using the proper water. That's big. We haven't taken anything away from the farmer. We haven't forced them into a corner they don't want to be in. We are teaching them how to continue to use the product with the goal in mind of going to zero, okay? Because I'm telling you, if we were to take glyphosate away tomorrow, it would be sheer chaos in the farming community, sheer chaos. And you think food's expensive now, it will go even higher. But once this is implemented correctly, properly, given the proper time, we can do this. We are now farming, going into our 12th year on the farm, of zero inputs. No herbicides, no insecticides, no seed treatments, no synthetic fertilizers, all of these things. Do we win the yield contest at the county fair? No. No. Are we profitable? Yes. And that to me is all that matters. Are we safe? Yes. When I started to look down the family tree of my heritage, cancer, 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 diabetes, diabetes, diabetes. Why? Why is this happening? I made a stand that we are not going to involve our team members, our family members, and put them in contact with these chemicals. When I look at human health, I look at the one side of the equation as they're both equally profound. The one is we've got to increase nutrient density. We've got to make our products healthier and safer for the consumer to eat. That's number one. Number two, we've got to make it healthier and safer for the farming community, like this gentleman talked about. When I look at a lot of these packages and what is on the packaging, some of them have skull and crossbones on there. Do you know what that means? That's death. And the farmer has been asked to farm in this method, and there's no other way to farm. So that day is coming. We can change that mindset. We can start to teach them with a goal of total elimination. But it's going to take time.
I love that distinction between yield and profitability and making that. And then also you did one great thing, which a lot of people can't, which is what's a solution? Yeah. And you talked about whatever this water system is and education. Yeah. So Miles, you got to follow all of that.
See, Miles, what do you do again?
I mentioned your piece in the Daily Signal talking about the difficult trade-offs, and Rick touched on it in that you can't just pull this from farmers right now. So you've done a lot of research on this, and you also highlight the history of the chemical. So tell us a little bit more about how glyphosate came to be so ubiquitous, and then what some of the trade-offs are.
Yep. Well, thank you for that, Jen. Got quite an act to follow. So I just want to lay down some clarifying context around herbicides, pesticides, like glyphosate. So really after the Second World War, that's when we saw the expansion of their use. A lot of chemical formulants like 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T. I could try pronouncing those. They're like 15 syllables each, so I'll spare you that. They became very popular across the United States. In fact, those two chemicals together were actually used very famously in the Vietnam War called Agent Orange. Unfortunately, the combination of trying to produce 2,4,5-T, the latter of those two formulants, unfortunately had a dioxin contaminant, which is a neurotoxin that very much is kind of linked to many of these health issues that we saw in the aftermath of the war. But it was actually used domestically in the United States. We use that as a pesticide. By the time it was phasing out in the EPA and others said, hey, there are some issues with this, there's a co-contaminant, that's when glyphosate actually came on the scene. So just to give you some context, by around 1987, we were using about 5,000 metric tons of glyphosate a year. By 2007, we were using over 80,000 metric tons. So that's about a 15-fold increase. We're somewhere north of that, between 80 and 100,000 metric tons every single year. And that's what we've been using. Now, from the literature side, I've read through, as many of these papers as I can, and I try to focus mainly on meta-analyses. But when we're coming to our conversation around this, there's some population cohorts that were used in many of these analyses. One was the agricultural health study. This followed North Carolinian and Iowan farmers and pesticide applicators. And throughout that study, they're asking, what was your exposure to glyphosate? How much were you using? A lot of meta-analyses that try to analyze that cohort, they don't really find cancer at massive risks for the lowest exposure groups. It's the highest exposure groups that are the ones where they find it. There's another big study that pulled together the agricultural health study in the US. They also pulled some farmers in Norway and in France. So that was, I think, over 400,000 farmers. the meta-analyses on that also found problems with certain types of leukemia among these very high exposure groups. Now, why might this be? So we had mentioned earlier that when you and I try to go to Home Depot and go to buy Roundup, we can't do so after 2023, but what we're talking is it's 128 fluid ounces, maybe 1 to 3 ounces of that is actually the glyphosate. But farmers, when they purchase it, they typically get some higher formulations. I think it's some of them are like BioFlow in the EU and in the US. Pro Ranger is one of the bigger ones. They buy concentrates. So that can be 40, 50% glyphosate by weight. Now, that's a much different exposure rate because it's now on the farmer to make sure that they get that combination correct for whenever they're applying. So if they're misapplying it, they can have higher exposure. So that brings me to the regulation side. The EPA basically says that if you get 1 milligram of exposure per kilogram body weight per day, I'm not going to repeat that over and over, but that's what they put it, 1 milligram, you're fine. They don't think you're at the toxicity threshold. For the European Union, they put it at half that. They put it at 0.5. So when we're talking about removing glyphosate, we're talking about cohorts that are exposed to more than this amount or on a higher end spectrum of that amount. But no one talks about what actually replaced the glyphosate that was in your Roundup. So I actually went to Home Depot 2 weekends ago. I love field analysis. So I went there and I looked at the label and they had one of the formulants included diquat dibromide, which is banned in the European Union. Its cousin paraquat is also banned in the European Union. Those 2 chemical formulants are now what they put in, and its toxicity threshold is about 100 times more acute than glyphosate. So we're talking about glyphosate, but they replaced it with something that is more toxic.
So are you saying we have the completely wrong panel up here that we should like, wait, are we on the wrong trail?
This is about pesticides in general, but I will say they use less of it, so it's more toxic, but you don't necessarily have the same amount that you had in glyphosate. And on the regulators, they always say if used as labeled. So that's what their distinction was. What really sounded the alarm bells was that 2015 Institute for the Advancing of Research on Cancer, which is a subsidiary of the WHO, like you said. But the 2A categorization, I just want to put this into context. They also said eating red meat is a 2A carcinogen. So for all of our carnivores in the audience, it's the same distinction, the same category. And there's difference in saying it's probably carcinogenic, and here's where our tests are. Now, most of these tests that we've done, I actually read through how they did it with lab mice, the mechanistic evidence that Dr. Nass has covered. We're seeing mainly it's cancers at high exposure levels. But one of the things that I want to point out, the Ramazani Institute released a new paper last year, and they actually did something that was useful, and I wanted to ask the rest of the panel what they thought. Was that instead of just studying glyphosate isolated, they actually grabbed this Roundup, this BioFlow in the EU, and this Pro Ranger in the US, and they tested it together because there are a lot of enhancers with these types of pesticides that actually make it more acute. So you might be studying glyphosate, but pesticide applicators aren't just applying the glyphosate. There's extra coformulants in it, so it gets to how actually a farmer would be exposed. And as I say in my op-ed about glyphosate, there is a big question around the gut microbiome. Now, I don't think the literature is settled on it. Most of it has been acute toxicity in humans. But that may not be the point. And maybe your gut microbiome is being affected in ways we don't understand, and maybe that's connected in some ways to these different things. But so the literature is contested, and that's where I mainly see it going forward, is trying to test for these high acute exposure individuals and checking the gut microbiome for what might be some connections there to your lymphatic immune system.
Yeah, like Dr. Ladapo said, it really does. Your gut is kind of the gateway to everything. In Ayurvedic medicine, that is the first source. If that becomes imbalanced, that eventually leads to disease if it's not treated at the imbalance level, and it does affect the immune system. So I think we're maybe asking better questions now. I'll kind of leave it because all of you pretty much answered in your first responses, all my follow-up questions. So if there was anything you wanted to comment, because Miles is kind of presenting this, historical context, I don't think making an argument for glyphosate, but just kind of some of the nuances, and if there's anything you wanted to respond, or you had ideas about how do we increase transparency. That's something else Dr. Ladapo and Dr. Richards brought up, is really not the bans, but if we're going to have this on the market, like Rick said, it's probably not prudent to just pull it for the farmers. If we're talking about dignity and respect, doing so would kind of take farmers out of the marketplace. A lot of the smaller ones, which we want to encourage. How can we increase transparency? What are some pathways, viable pathways forward?
Well, I'm pleased with what the information Miles gave us, because it just affirms that what I'm doing is the right thing to get away. We've figured out a way to work without it. We just need to be able to teach the larger group of farmers how to be able to farm. And the consumer needs education here as well. I truly believe that the consumer walks into a grocery store and they believe that why would our government have anything on that shelf that's harmful for me? I truly believe they think that. So we need to make sure, because the consumer's going to drive this thing. I mean, they're the ones who are going to make the shift in the farming community to farm differently, because they're going to demand a product that is safer for them. I mean, it's difficult to try to be healthy. It really is. You go to the store, you got to look at the label. I mean, you're in there for hours. You're going to pick up 5 things, and it's expensive. I mean, you get to the counter and you got 2 bags you're carrying out, and it's $200. So we've got to get everyone over this sticker shock and educate them that we have to care about the human society and the health of the human society. And we can do this, but it's not going to just happen tomorrow. It's going to take some time.
Well, and tell me what you think. My gut instinct, pun intended, is that a lot of what we're consuming now isn't even really food, and the ingredients that are going into highly processed food, a majority of them are the ones that are being grown with glyphosate: corn, wheat, soy. So again, it's questionable if we even call that nutrition. I mean, we'd call it food, but I wouldn't call it nourishment. So we've increased this production of these crops with the glyphosate, and then we have to put them somewhere. We have to put them in all this kind of junk food.
But why? Why is that happening? Because we've spoiled the consumer to get a product that is quick and easy and stop on the way to the kids' soccer match. That's why. I mean, why is the fruit painted to make it look nice and bright and shiny? I mean, come on. We've got to get back to basics, and you may walk into that grocery store and there may be a small little wormhole on that apple, but that's okay, because that means that apple's healthy. That worm is alive in there. He's not dead. So we've got to start thinking about not being so easy-minded for what the consumer's eye appeal is to walk into a store.
I want to disagree with you a little bit, because when I was young, we also had snack foods and junk foods, and they were not nearly as bad as the foods today, because we've had all industry develop. We have these gross additives to food. We have these highly ultra-processed foods have 20% the nutrition per calorie in terms of minerals, vitamins, that they would have if they hadn't been so highly processed. We've got the seed oils. As you said, most of the corn that's grown in the United States is only a very small percentage, about 10%, goes to human food, and the rest goes to animal food or ethanol or corn oil. And then we have that period of time when the tobacco manufacturers bought a lot of the snack food companies and started using their flavorings and their addicting substances that they had put into cigarettes. Cigarettes had 80 different chemicals in them to addict us. And then they started using that stuff in the food. And that is what we and our kids are eating now if you're buying, packaged processed food in the store. So you don't have the choices we used to have. And the whole system, has gone into what makes the most profit. And nobody is responsible for the cumulative effects on our health. And so in Europe, where a lot of this stuff is banned, life expectancy has been going up, 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 and ours has been sort of on a stable level, even dropped for a while, and now we're going up, but not nearly at the rate of the Europeans.
I think we're going or staying from the pharmaceutical industry as the Band-Aid, right? Like you have these diseases of immunity, autoimmunity, microbiome, whatever it is, cancer, heart disease, and then they'll keep you alive with the pharmaceuticals, right? Just to mask the symptoms. It's not really health.
We don't have the years of healthy life that they have in other countries. We have many more years of disability and chronic illness.
Well, I'm trying not to go doom and gloom here. I'd love some positive notes, but I will go back to you, Pedram. How are they going to get away with liability shields? Let's talk about that. Are they? What can we do? Will there be more lawsuits? I mean, there won't be lawsuits if they get liability shields, but enlighten us a little.
They got a lot of money, and they have a lot of contacts and a lot of power and influence in industry and academia. I mean, the reality is the more information out there about this through the work that we've done, for example, policymakers, concerned citizens, scientists, the more awake people are going to become to this, and more pressure is going to be put on these corporations, and then vice versa, more pressure on the governments to do something about what the corporations are doing. Ultimately, from my perspective, as an attorney, lawyer representing these folks in litigation, the number one claim that we made against Monsanto was, listen, if there is a risk, which the science indicates there is, put a damn label warning on it. Like tell the consumer, tell the farmer, listen, if you spray this product for X number of days a year under these conditions, Miles, right?
Yep.
Went through all the research. Monsanto has this research. You can make labeling decisions based on this research. Tell the consumer it's going to increase your risk by X amount, or if you have certain medical conditions, it's going to affect you this way, and the consumer and society can make an informed choice, that's the evidence we presented to the jury, and we told the jury, you can disagree all you want about the policy implications and what the right answer is ultimately for all of society, but right now in front of us, there's enough data to at least warn and inform consumers so they can make informed choices about the products they expose themselves and their families to. I think that's a good starting point.
So what we're dealing with is a company that has run amok, and it's been running amok for many decades, and that is Monsanto and then Bayer, which now owns it. So what they have had to pay out already on claims for glyphosate causing non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, $11 billion. And they said, look, we're going for broke. We cannot afford this. This is a product we want to keep selling. It's doing well. And weeds, Monsanto, glyphosate was a magical product. It got rid of weeds, which was the most expensive thing that farmers had to do. And if you wanted a beautiful garden, all you had to spray this stuff, and suddenly you had a beautiful garden. So they think they can keep selling it. And they came up with a multi-pronged strategy, which was, we go to Congress. We want Congress to find a way to give us a liability shield. And no doubt this was Monsanto's lawyers that came up with these strategies. We go to the states. They've been to 21 states already. They've gotten 2 states to already give them basically a liability shield, saying you can't sue in state court over these glyphosate injuries. They went to the Supreme Court. They picked a case that they had lost and asked the Supreme Court to take it. They got the executive branch. The Department of Justice has filed 2 amicus briefs on that case, told the Supreme Court to take it, and instructed the Supreme Court that the federal government wants them to rule in favor of Bayer and give them a so all of these are different ways of getting a liability shield. If they couldn't, and then there was an executive order on February 18th that Trump issued, which said, and I quote, Ensuring an adequate supply of elemental phosphorus and glyphosate-based herbicides is thus crucial to the national security and defense, including food supply security, which is essential to protecting the health and safety of Americans. So suddenly glyphosate and phosphorus, and guess what? Who are the only two domestic producers of elemental, which company is the only domestic producer of elemental phosphorus and glyphosate? Bayer. So Bayer was given this extraordinary, basically under the Defense Production Act, where the government is going to order more of this stuff and give them liability protection. It wasn't specified what type of liability protection, but this, whatever the liability protection is, it's unique. It is unprecedented. And this was given to them just a month ago. Then Monsanto Bayer said, look, if none of this stuff works, we're just going to stop making it available. And they've tried to scare farmers. You're not going to be able to get it anymore. And you're going to have to figure out how to farm without it. Or we'll spin off one division. We'll put all the liability in that division. And they can go bankrupt, and we can still sell it. Or we're developing lots of other pesticides. We'll just keep replacing it. And as soon as you find out one causes cancer, we'll just switch to another one. So that is the company we're dealing with. Bayer spent $63 billion in 2018 to buy Monsanto. They've spent $11 billion so far. They've got a big war chest. And it's Bayer against the rest of the world, basically. And who's going to win? Do we have a government that can be bought for $20 billion?
Okay. So briefly, and I do really want to get to questions from the audience and online, because I know we have a big online audience. Speed round, if you could instill one policy right now, what would it be?
What Rick is doing on a broader scale, honestly. Like if farmers are taught to do what Rick is doing, this is a mood issue, because he does, permaculture, getting away from monoculture production, less reliance on synthetics. I mean, the technology is there, the knowledge is there. I just wish they would invest the kind of money to do it in people like Rick that they do for big agri.
Yeah. Well, like you said, too, I think it points to the fact that policy can only do so much. Education is really a big part of this as well. Meryl, one policy.
Okay, so I would just say that we have to do honest science and honest regulation. I mean, we do have laws about how regulation is supposed to be accomplished. We're not following those laws and rules.
One policy.
Well, I just want, that policy, I need to give you an example. So we had some problems with vaccines. We had vaccines that caused polio, for example, back in the 60s and 50s. And we had other problems. NIH was the regulator of vaccines then. And Congress said, you're not doing your job, and took the regulation of vaccines away from NIH and put it into the FDA in 1972. And right now, EPA is not doing its job to regulate pesticides. And maybe we need to put it into another agency.
Okay. Well, I need to pause for one moment. Pedram needs to take a very important case, I believe.
Yeah, it's a court hearing.
A court hearing from California. So if we could just thank him very quickly, and we'll continue. Rick, what policy would help you, or you think help farmers like you, make these changes?
Yeah, I'm not good on what the policy would be. Let me give you what my mechanism would be. It all starts with RMA. RMA has to be educated, and
Can you tell us what RMA is?
Risk Management Association, part of the USDA.
Okay.
The farmers depend heavily on multi-peril crop insurance, and they depend heavily on payments. There was just a bridge payment that happened. To fully utilize the principles of soil health, you need to incorporate minimal tillage, and you need to incorporate a reduction of inputs along with other, those are just two of them. RMA needs to change the rules that then would allow the farmers to incorporate more cover crops into their system, because the way the rules are written, the cover crops will knock them out of the multi-peril insurance because it's going to reduce the yield at the end of the day. So right there, there's no incentive for the farmer to do anything, okay? Then I don't understand how a government can give money away and never ask for anything in return. So at the RMA level, you now can implement the rules that would be associated with those payments back. If you want to get full, you know, I'm just spitballing here. If you are going to be able to get paid $85 an acre for whatever reason, you need to give us something in return of doing these practices of no-till, of cover cropping, learn how to farm without all of these inputs. And then that puts some skin in the game, and you got some teeth here. That's where I would be at, is RMA.
Great, thank you. Miles?
Yep, I'll be quick. So I think that the work that Florida has done at the state level is actually very good. They've compiled a list of certain products and what is the amount of glyphosate and its chemical derivatives are in the food. But I would just provide one point of context, is that when we studied the average amount of glyphosate in human excreta, we were finding about 0.4 micrograms per liter. That's about 1,000-fold below the actual amounts that the EPA has set as the acute toxicity threshold. So while it is in the food, it is at a detectable level. Some of the food, there's actually none. There was like 6 different types of bread, and 2 of them, there were no detectable levels, so pretty good on them. But it's just transparency. If people care about this, the market will drive it. Rather than trying to go with a government top-down solution, I think people will naturally put their money to where what they think is best. We have to be honest about the science, honest about these thresholds, and about how much really is in there, and about the cost that it could face for the consumer. But someone choosing to pay $6 instead of $5 for a loaf of bread, that's their choice. But mandating that everyone now pays $15 because it has to be all organic, that's a different policy choice. That's all I'll say.
Great, thank you. So we have time for a couple questions, and let me get back in the pink there.
Hi, Arena Agnew with Bioethics Bay Podcast. I mean, the elephant in the room is, why can't we create pesticides that are non-toxic to begin with? We're making a lot of headway in technologically in so many ways. Why are we still using toxic pesticides to begin with, whether it's glyphosate or something else? There must be other options. So what's been done?
I have that. So there actually is some market alternatives. Diphamorphous clay, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, has been one of the alternatives. They're just not as effective, but if I think it's organic safe, like it's all natural, and those are marketable terms. You're saying like, hey, I use all organic, I only use this clay. Do you want to pay the higher price premium for that compared to the pesticides? So someone wants to advertise on that point, just like all the protein bowls we see everywhere now. People will pay more if something has more protein or is not using certain chemical formulants. So there are some available, but they're just now reaching the market.
Well, and I think maybe this speaks to Rick's point, is that the emphasis, like you said, they might not be as effective, might not get as much yield, but you can still be profitable. Is that correct,
Yeah.
Rick?
Yeah, and we could go really deep here, but it's a great question. If you can build the system that builds soil health, you don't need any of these pesticides. Okay, that's number one. It's no different. The growing crops that we have growing in our fields, it's no different than the animal in the jungle that is going to be taken away for food from some other animal. They're going to go after the weak animals. The same thing is happening in the fields. When you build soil health and you have a healthy environment, we haven't used any pesticides or insecticides in years. but yet you can't grow corn. Yes, you can. We've done it. So once we also learn, again, this is where I could go deep. Certain plants give off certain exudates, and certain exudates trigger certain weed species to then say it's time to grow and procreate. Okay, and once we understand in greater depth what those exudates, which plant species affect which seeds, then we're really coming down in to where now there is nothing being applied, a biology package, and once you take away all of the caustic herbicides, the acids and the salts, and stop killing the beneficial microbes, then the system thrives, and that's where we are.
I think, too, what really helped me is that when I heard glyphosate it's an antibiotic. And you think about what happens to your gut. You know, when a doctor gives you antibiotics now, they make sure to put you on a very heavy probiotic regimen, I think. Dr. Ladapo, am I right?
And what's a fungicide? The name in itself is what it kills all fungi.
Right. That really made it click for me, right? That you're killing everything when you use these products. Helda? The mic's coming to you, hon.
Hi, I'm Ballistic Hilda. I'm working with Bonnie Hari and Del Bigtree and Zen Honeycutt from Moms Across America to put together a protest called The People versus Poison about a month from now, April 27th, in front of the Supreme Court. We expect that this will raise consumer awareness and the public's awareness about the problem with pesticides, but what other things do you think might come about as a result of that kind of a thousands gathering in front of the Supreme Court protesting pesticides like glyphosate and this liability shield?
So let me just say that on April 27th, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on this case we've talked about, which is Monsanto versus Durnell. And so they're trying to get a big demonstration. But of course, justice is supposed to be blind, so the Supreme Court judges are presumably not going to pay any attention. Will they pay attention to what Trump's executive order said, or what's going? You see, Monsanto Bayer set up a system where any one of the mechanisms they tried, if even one works, they get a liability shield. So if the states give it to them, if the Supreme Court gives it to them, if Congress in the Farm Bill, which has the most horrible, they're just taking away regulation of pesticides in the proposed Farm Bill, which is sitting right now in the House. If any of those go through, any one, Bayer will get its liability shield one way or another.
Do we have any online? I know, Lydia, because we have a lot of people. Judy, do you have the online questions? I would like to get to at least one of them.
I have the online questions here. So this was touched upon a little bit during the panel, but supposing we succeed in banning glyphosate or heavily reducing its use, how do we make sure that what replaces it is not just as bad or even worse? Currently, there are no systems in place ensuring that untested or inadequately tested chemicals don't end up on the U.S. market poisoning us all. What needs to be done to prevent this and to ensure sufficient testing of all chemicals before they're allowed on the market?
Honest regulation.
Yep. I would say sober cost-benefit analysis. As I mentioned, diquat dibromide is an alternative that's been put into the residential formulations. All these things deserve to be investigated. The European Union is doing studies right now. They allow glyphosate to 2033, and the U.S., I believe it was the Ninth Circuit Court, pushed back on the EPA's interim decision. So these things are being looked at, and we should soberly analyze. It's not just glyphosate. That's the dirty word at the moment. It's there's a whole system around this. There are cost benefits to all of this, and that we need to understand that if you just try to ban one thing, there will be alternatives, and you want to make sure you don't go to something else. But the poison is in the dosage.
I also think the legal system is really the last. Unfortunately, Pedram has left, but that's what it comes to sometimes is lawsuits. And if we lose that ability, then we really don't have a free market. We don't have transparency. And I'll take one more from. Did you want to add something?
That's
Ray?
okay. Go ahead. If I got time, I'll say it.
Okay. One more.
Hi. My question is, thank you for teeing that up, because it's a legal question for Dr. Ladapo and gentlemen, anyone else. Has there been any thought and I'm with the Clean Label Project. So we test products for pesticides, glyphosates, et cetera. And we are finding glyphosate or glyphosate residue on organic certified products, including either glyphosate or AMPA, which is the breakdown of glyphosate. And we know that can happen from environmental runoff or from a farm directly applying it, lots of ways. So that's not disputed. My question is there any thought, maybe the state of Florida, with the gentleman who took on Monsanto, go after the USDA? Because I, like you, because you said go out and buy organic with the assumption it's not on there. So it is false advertising. The USDA is failing to regulate what organic means. So maybe it's another way to hold, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And if you go to the grocery store and you're buying organic, it should mean something. And if it doesn't, you go back, they don't test the product, it's an audit of paper trail. So that's what a lot of consumers don't understand, that it's a certificate. So it's a legal question.
Yeah, actually, FDA is also responsible for looking at the pesticide residues in food, not in meat, but in other foods. So each agency, the EPA, the USDA, and the FDA, they're all falling down on the job. What I have read is that the organic produce, which I eat too, does have often glyphosate in it, but at much lower levels, like maybe a 10th as much or a 5th as much as the ordinary. It's still a problem. All I can say is the entire way of regulating organics is a failure. That's another corruption, neglect problem that we don't have time to get into.
Does anyone have any? Can we end this on a positive note?
Well, I will say that when we raise crops that are going to go in as what's called food grade, every load's tested for GMOs. Every load. So if something is higher than what the expected or not the regulated level, we get rejected. It's never happened. But you're correct. There's glyphosate in the rainwater. So it's kind of hard to have a clean field anymore.
Dr. Ladapo, would you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I'm just going to share my opinion on this. I like what Dr. Nass was saying. And so when we did bread testing, and we actually had that. So we don't eat a lot of bread, but when my wife buys bread, we usually get I think it's Dave's Killer Bread, and pretty popular bread brand with an interesting backstory and all that. And they had, about, they had some glyphosate in them, and it was about, I think, 5 or 10% as much as the regular breads that totally had glyphosate. So, it's organic. And then there were some other breads that we had that had undetectable. So it was more than the undetectables, but, much less than the conventional brands that had, more of it than any of us want to or ought to be eating. And my opinion about that is that it's not cool, but I think about it practically. You know what I mean? Like Rick Clark was saying, it's unfortunately so ubiquitous that it's hard to escape. And I think that I don't personally, it's always thinking about strategy. I don't personally feel that it's a strong leverage point. I think it's a problem if it's labeled organic and the levels are comparable to the non-organics. Like, that's a problem, in my opinion. But if it's 5-10%, it's not great, but that's like the mouse, the tiger is the fact that these levels are so much higher in other things. That's my opinion about it, so for what if that's worth.
I know we're out of time, but is there any way we can let's just take Dave's Killer Bread. We buy that. And let's say Dave's Killer Bread gets bought out by someone who's trying to buy their competition out, okay? And then guess what happens to Dave's Killer Bread? It's just dissolves and goes away, and now we don't have that. Can we stop that from happening? I mean, if a company buys someone who's truly trying to build a product for us, can it not get changed? Can its face not be changed because it was bought by somebody else?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I have something to say on that, but we do have time, so I definitely want to thank Dr. Ladapo for leading the way in Florida. And I know this wasn't the most optimistic panel we've ever done, but I really think these conversations are so important to have. And so I applaud you for having the courage and the bravery to just speak out, tell the truth, and really educate everybody out there. So
I think the future looks bright. I do.
The future looks bright. We'll take that, Rick. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to those who joined us online. For those of you who are here in the room, there is lunch in the back, and we'll be around for a couple minutes.